Liz, we want to start on time because we want to be mindful of folks' time.
I think so.
So,
We got a lot to cover.
yes, indeed. Welcome, everyone. That's first of all. We appreciate you taking time out on your Monday evening to join us. I am Vickie R. Williams-Cullins. I am with OPN-Door Communications. I'm a mediator, trainer, and a conflict coach, and I am all about communication. Full transparency. I also serve on the board of Upvote. Now, Upvote, I'm going to introduce our executive director, Liz White, and she's going to give you just a snippet of what we do here at Upvote and how we're here to inform, engage, and empower you about ranked choice voting. Liz?
All right, Vickie, thank you so much. Vickie is on our board and we're thrilled to have her, and you all are in great hands tonight with this event. You're going to have such a good time. She always takes very good care of her panel and her participants. So thank you all so much to our panelists for being here. Thank you to you all for joining us on a Monday evening to talk about ranked choice voting. I'm going to share my screen as soon as I figure out, there it is. As soon as I figure out the right tab, here we go. So I would just like to share about ranked choice voting for a quick few minutes here at the beginning to do an overview so everyone's on the same page for the rest of the discussion as we get more into the impact and the effects of this policy. So ranked choice voting is a simple change to the way we vote that enables a better voter experience, better campaigns, and ultimately better government. RCV gives voters more freedom, a more thorough expression, and more power. So simply put, instead of going and voting and picking just your favorite candidate out of however many options there are, you get to say, this is my favorite, but this is my second favorite, this is my third favorite, and so on. It only applies in races with more than two candidates, because the goal with ranked choice voting is to find the candidate who has the support of the majority of voters. So if you've only got two candidates, someone inevitably is going to get over that 50% mark, barring something unusual like a very successful write-in candidate or something like that. So if you have these three or more candidates in a race, as that ballot gets a little more crowded, if a candidate right off the bat gets more than 50% of the vote, you're done. RCV doesn't even ever kick in. But if that doesn't happen, which is so often the case on a crowded ballot, that's when RCV becomes implemented. And the reason we are talking about this now, you may be saying to yourself, where did this come from? Why is this what people are talking about now? Part of it is that we have so many people stepping up to run for office, which is a great thing. We always want more perspectives, more voices in the conversation, more brain power on the problems that face us as voters and as citizens. And the current system with a more crowded ballot does not support what we're seeing. So how does ranked choice voting work? So you have your three or more candidates, cast your votes, is at the 50% threshold yet. What happens next is an instant runoff. So the candidate with the fewest votes on that first ballot is eliminated. The voters who voted for that eliminated candidate have their second choices now applied in the next ballot. So it's just like what you would see in Georgia, for example, where you have three candidates, no one hits 50%, the lowest vote getter is eliminated, and everyone has to come back weeks later and vote again. This accomplishes the same thing, but all at one time. So you can see these little pictures. In round one, purple in a traditional election wins. Purple gets 50% or 40%, excuse me, of the vote. But that means that 60% of voters wanted somebody else, and that's all we know. So we eliminate this dark blue candidate because they only got 25% of the vote, and we redistribute those votes. 15 out of the 25% prefer the purple candidate as their second choice, and only 10 out of the 25% prefer the red. So those are reassigned. And now you have this very tall purple column. And it turns out they do have support from the majority of voters. They're at the 55 threshold now. So that's, again, the back end gets a little complicated, but on the front end, you just as a voter walk in and you see something like this. It kind of looks like a standardized test. You walk in and you say, all right, for my first choice, I want purple. For my second choice, red. For my third choice, blue. And we'll talk later in the evening about how voters rank things all the time. This is something we're very used to doing. So from a voter perspective, it really is a simple procedure. In Virginia, the only law we currently have on the books that allows for ranked choice voting is HB 1103. It was passed in 2020, and it gives localities the option to use ranked choice voting for their city council or board of supervisors elections. The city council or board of supervisors takes a majority vote, they pass an ordinance, and that county or city now has the ability to use ranked choice voting in those local governing elections, local governing body elections. Arlington County is the first locality to take Virginia up on that, and they will be using ranked choice voting in their Democratic primary this June. So we'll all be looking at them and seeing how that process works out here in Virginia. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted everyone to at least have a baseline. But I'm going to hand it back to Vickie. Thank you so much again for all being here.
Absolutely, Liz. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ranked choice voting, I know for the majority of you, you probably either never heard of it. And if you heard of it, you're wondering how, why, and thirdly, how does it affect communities of color? Well, tonight, we're going to talk about ranked choice voting, and we're going to talk about its effect or how it can affect communities of color. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to bring them all back, and they got their little 5-minute spiel on what they'll be talking about, and I'll give you a heads up on that. So first, allow me to introduce Maria Perez. She and I share glasses, and that right there is just a beautiful thing. Welcome, Maria. And Maria is the co-director of Democracy Rising. Born and raised in Ecuador, Maria immigrated to the United States in the 1990s to pursue her education. A seasoned nonprofit leader, organizer, facilitator, advocate, educator, and coalition builder. Maria is a firm believer in the power of people coming together to address complex social problems. She has previously worked as director of Fair Vote, New Mexico, and campaign manager for Common Cause, New Mexico. Maria, my friend, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, I will introduce Henry L. Chambers Jr., my man Hank, professor at University of Richmond Law. Professor Chambers teaches and writes in the areas of constitutional law, criminal law, law and religion, and employment discrimination. He served as Special Assistant Attorney General for redistricting matters for the Commonwealth of Virginia from 2011 to 2013, and frequently lectures on constitutional law around the Commonwealth. And I promise y'all, constitutional law is very interesting. You just got to get into it. And last but certainly not least, Jerome Legends, president of Richmond Crusade of Voters. Born in Philly and now a fixture in the city of Richmond, Jerome is the new president of Richmond Crusade for Voters and seeks to increase the organization's nonpartisan influence. Jerome is also the president of Moore Street School Foundation, the Carver Area Civic Improvement League, and an active member of the Brothers of Purple and Gold, Omega Psi Phi fraternity. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you.
All right, now, first up, we got my man, Hank. And Hank is going to provide us with an overview of Virginia's voting history. Hank, you have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Vickie. I appreciate that. It's good to see folks here, and good to see folks introducing themselves in the chat and Q&A going on. Now, technically, I've got 10 minutes, but I actually don't want to take the full 10 minutes. because I really would love to hear questions and hear what's on folks' minds. But let me just give a little bit of background that's relevant to elections and relevant to race in some respects in Virginia. So let me just note that before the 1960s, the basic protection for minorities in particular and for voting in general was through the 14th Amendment and 15th Amendment. So thing to remember about 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment of the US Constitution is that the 14th Amendment provides for equal protection. So it says we're supposed to be treated equally, but it did not apply to voting when it was originally passed in the wake of the Civil War. Okay. Now it does apply to voting, but at that time it didn't really apply to voting. 15th Amendment comes in also in the wake of the Civil War, and it limits states from discriminating with respect to the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So the notion was that given that states could still discriminate on the basis of sex and gender, essentially the 15th Amendment provided African-American men, former slaves, and other folks with the right to vote, assuming that a state was going to provide it. Now, we realize that there were some additional issues and problems that came around in the wake of the 15th Amendment, but in Virginia, at least for a time period, we actually did have some Black legislators who were elected to the General Assembly in the late 1800s. That, of course, got shot down or got closed out in the late 1800s as there was a retrenchment in the wake of Reconstruction and the generation after that. A dark time in Virginia history, but it was what it was. So it was until essentially the 1960s that we were in the wilderness a bit. Two things popped up in the 60s, the one person, one vote move and the Voting Rights Act. The idea behind one person, one vote was that each vote should have approximately the same value. And the way that one person, one vote was operationalized is by requiring each district to have approximately the same number of people. So, for example, the Virginia legislature, General Assembly, House of Delegates has 100 members. One person, one vote says each district has to have about 1/100th of Virginia's population. Voting Rights Act also popped up and essentially said, Voting Rights Act of 1965 said that there's a right to representation on the basis of race. Not to say that every race gets to have a certain number of representatives, but it is to say that generally speaking, states cannot deny the ability of folks to get together to elect their representative of choice when they have sufficient numbers to do so. So those two pieces of the puzzle, one person, one vote, and the Voting Rights Act, ushered in the realm of redistricting and redistricting battles that have gone on since the 1970s. So it's fair to say that what we had in the 1960s, 1970s were various forms of districting. So let me just note for the general, with respect to the General Assembly. In the General Assembly, there were what we call single-member districts and multi-member districts. When we think about multi-member districts, we think of at-large districts, but essentially they're districts that are drawn where multiple representatives are chosen from that district. That actually was in place, like I say, in the 70s and the early 80s. However, multi-member districts can be used to limit or eliminate the ability of minority groups to elect their candidates of choice. Consequently, in the wake of the Voting Rights Act, courts eliminated the General Assembly from using multi-member districts in the 1980s. So now here we are with single-member districting in the General Assembly. Not only is it single-member districting, but it's also what we call first past the post or plurality voting. It gets at what Liz was talking about in the lead-in. That is to say, first past the post voting or plurality voting means whoever wins the most number of votes the first time through wins, even if that's a minority of the votes. So as Liz was suggesting, assume we have 100 votes in a district, 3 people running, one person gets 40, one person gets 35, one person gets, I think 25 is left over. The person who wins 40 wins, even though 40 is less than half of the 100 votes that are out there. That can have implications that I'm sure we'll talk about in the remainder of our time. The other piece of the puzzle that arises is that we also have the possibility of gerrymandering. And that can also have a limit on, can limit whether minority groups and other groups can elect their candidate of choice, because the way that lines are drawn, you can run into some problems and some issues. Don't want to go any farther into that because I'm already at 5 minutes, and I swore I wouldn't take 10. But I do want to note one thing before we head into our next speaker, and that's this. The way we vote now, first past the post single member districting, is very familiar to folks when we're talking about the General Assembly. But the mere fact that it is familiar to folks does not mean that that's the way it's always been. As I noted, we used to have multi-member districts. We still have at-large districts in other bodies. For example, school boards sometimes can be voted on at large, et cetera. So when we think about what system we have, what we need to think about is what the system we have gets us. If we're not happy with what we have now in terms of representatives, if we're not happy with respect to what we have in terms of folks running for office, if we're not happy in terms of how campaigns are run, then you've got to think about how you might be able to change the voting system in order to get what it is that you want. If you want more people who are cooperating with one another, you might be looking at ranked choice voting. If you're looking for candidates who are willing to work across party lines and work with their folks, or work with other folks who don't look exactly like them and think exactly like them, then ranked choice voting may be what you're looking for. If, on the other hand, you are 100% thrilled with what you have now in campaigns and in representation, and in terms of what the General Assembly and local county commissions are doing, good on you. Maybe you want to keep what you have. I don't think people are here because they love what we have. So we probably ought to think about ranked choice voting, and hopefully the remainder of our time today will allow us to do some talking, discussing, and thinking about that issue. I'm done. Thanks a bunch.
Hank, that was fantastic. One person, one vote. And what is the outcome that you see? Is what you're seeing at this moment, are the candidates that are being elected, are they of value to you? We have some decisions to make, folks. And now we're going to move on to Maria. And Maria is going to give us an introduction on democracy rising and the summary of the benefits of ranked choice voting, specifically for persons of color. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here. So my name is Maria Perez. I am based in the state of New Mexico. I am co-director of this organization called Democracy Rising. Basically, we are a national organization, and the bulk of our work involves working either with jurisdictions or with community coalitions in locations that are implementing some sort of electoral or democracy reform. A lot of our work has to do with ranked choice voting. We've worked in dozens of different jurisdictions throughout the country that have implemented ranked choice voting. And what we do is we collaborate with those jurisdictions or community coalitions to develop voter education plans for that implementation of the new method. And we also train candidates, right? Because candidates need to know what the changes are about, how it changes their strategy. And frankly, most voters really hear about elections coming up from the candidates. So it's important that candidates know what's going on, that they're able to give correct information to the voters as well. So that's bread and butter of what my organization does. In the work that we've done throughout the country, in all these different jurisdictions, one of our main goals is really to make sure that all those communities that are usually left behind are not left behind, right? That they're brought into the fold of like this voter education plans, and that folks are more than just giving a few bullet points of information. This is what your ballot's going to look like. This is what's going to change for you as a voter when you go vote in this next election. That we involve folks in terms of having conversations. How is this new method of voting? How is ranked choice voting an opportunity for you and your community to build power, to have access to political power and decision making? So that is a key piece of this, right? Because you can pass the most amazing reform that anybody's ever heard of. If people are not aware of what the change is, and if people are not invested in this change being implemented justly and sustainably, then that's when we run into issues where recalls happen or people are just confused and not engaged. Ranked choice voting is, it's not the fix all for everything, right? But it is a wonderful step to take in the direction of a stronger democracy because of the points that have been brought up already, right? It gives voters an opportunity to have a more nuanced say in who gets elected. It takes away that problem about voters having to hold their nose and vote for a candidate they don't really love maybe, but who is more electable than the other candidate, right? There's all these calculations that we are asked as voters. I'd like to ask all of our attendees today, if there's anybody here who has ever not had to hold your nose at some point or another when you were casting your ballot, right? So because of these different issues, ranked choice voting benefits communities of color. I'll give a couple of examples of why. For one thing, as a candidate, right, you are never asked to wait in line and wait for your turn. It's always your turn. One of the advantages of ranked choice voting is that you eliminate this vote splitting situation that happens sometimes. Let's say there's a community that's majority Black. There's one Caucasian candidate and 3 Black candidates. The Black vote gets split between the 3 Black candidates and the white candidate gets elected, right? That is not, that problem gets eliminated with ranked choice voting. What would happen is the Black vote gets split between the 3 Black candidates, and the most preferred candidate of those 3 will get the majority of the vote and get elected. So it gives opportunity to candidates of color to throw their hat in the race, to run, and possibly to win. But even if they don't have enough popular support to win, they're not going to be splitting the vote or creating a problem for another candidate that aligns with them around values or around the constituencies that they serve. As a voter, ranked choice voting is an advantageous model because, again, you are much more able to elect a candidate of your choice. It might be somebody who belongs to your same racial or cultural identity, or it could just be somebody who aligns with you more on values. But again, you never have to waste your vote. And as a community, you're able to elect a candidate of choice. What I'm going to say very briefly is that voter education is key. It's very important when you are educating voters on this new way of voting, that materials and educational messaging is not just developed by white folks for white folks and then translated or just like shared out with different communities. In our work, the best practice is to find those folks in the community who work directly with different constituencies, right? These can be language communities or cultural identity communities or what have you. But there are groups, there are organizations that work with specific demographics and constituencies who have the trust of those communities, who know how to communicate, how to message through social media or through community meetings or however it may be. They know best. So partner with those folks and have them figure out how to share information with their constituencies. That is the best practice, the key thing. We have done a lot of focus groups. We have talked to a lot of voters, done a lot of exit polls. Nobody is confused about ranked choice voting, really. In all of the exit polls that have been done all over the country, 80 to 90% of voters of all ethnicities, ages, and everything else say that it was easy enough. They understand it, they get it. But it's important that they get that information from trusted messengers. And I'll leave it there so we can have a more robust conversation later. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much. And you said some very key points. Trusted messenger, right? And also holding your nose for a candidate. And also, Maria may have touched upon it, but I'm gonna put that on the table. Backroom deals. That could stop these backroom deals. When you have three candidates of color running, and then you have one white candidate, and then they're like, well, we don't want to split the vote. So you're gonna have to bow out, you'll bow out, and then I'm gonna take it. So we want to stop that. We want to be as fair and equitable as possible. And certainly last but not least, we have Jerome. And Jerome is going to speak about Crusade of Voters and why they decided to endorse ranked choice voting and how they effectively advocated for their support with their membership. And I know how difficult that can be, Jerome. So please tell us a little bit about Crusade Voters and why you support ranked choice voting and how you were able to be a trusted messenger to your membership group. Jerome, come to the floor.
Well, thank you very much. It's kind of an interesting process because when ranked choice voting was presented to the Richmond Crusade for Voters, there were quite a bit of uncertainty, and the reason why there was some uncertainty is because the Richmond Crusade for Voters is a very old organization. I think we're like 67 years old. And so we have always been fighting to have our voices heard through the elections, through our elected officials for the most part. And so when we start talking about ranked choice voting, folks would say, no, that's not the way to go. Definitely, that's not the way to go. We receive information from inside of the organization to say this is not the way to go. And we will receive information from some elected officials to say, why are you guys doing this? This is not what you are about. But with all of that being said, our president at the time, he had the foresight to say, this is what we need to be looking at. We were paying attention to the elections as far as the city of Richmond was concerned, and we were recognizing that people were actually being elected on a third of the representation in their communities. But yet at the same time, they would say that, oh yes, I'm representing my community. And we kind of saw that and said, well, no, you're truly not representing your community because we can tell by some of the services that's being provided in certain areas. And so that's when we looked at ranked choice voting to see that this was a valuable tool in order to have more messaging done as far as communities are concerned. When we started out, the president said, we need to get in front of this instead of getting behind it and chasing it. He said, if we are a voter education organization, if we knock on someone's door and they say to us, do you understand ranked choice voting or tell me about ranked choice voting, and we cannot do it, then how are we talking about voter education? That means that we will be lagging behind in that process. And so we actually start talking about it over and over and over again in exec council meetings, in journal membership meeting. People kept saying that they did not understand ranked choice voting at all. And some of the members in there said, well, I do. And so they said, let me tell you how this is going to work. And so what we did in order to make the body understand ranked choice voting is that we had a ranked choice voting election. We went out and got a bunch of M&Ms, the different types of M&Ms, and said, what's your favorite? We gave them a ballot and they voted on their favorite M&Ms. And then they would see, the first go round, your crew is out. And you could see the light bulbs go off in the room like, oh, this is how this works. This is not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. And so now we talk about ranked choice voting on a regular basis for the most part. Matter of fact, what was interesting was the fact that we start talking about the candidates that's coming up for election. How do we support those candidates? And someone said, let's use ranked choice voting. Since we are, in favor of it, let's use ranked choice voting. With that being said, we have become one of I think probably the only African-American organization in the city of Richmond that is promoting ranked choice voting. And so people are looking at us to say, what makes you guys think that this is going to work? And we tell them how it worked in our organization with just M&Ms, okay? We also ask them questions such as, how happy are you with your elected officials? And so they would say, well, well, if you're saying, well, you're not really that happy with them. We asked them, well, did you vote for this person or we didn't ask them directly who they voted for, but we asked them that voting process. And Henry Chambers and Maria both touched on that situation extremely well. And so folks are understanding that as far as voting is concerned, that they will get rid of the backroom deals. They would get the split votes, because we talked about that just recently as far as voting was concerned. Someone said, well, there's two black candidates running and there's a white candidate running, and they're going to split that vote so the white candidate will move in. And the issue is not so much the color of the candidate's skin for the most part, but will that candidate well represent their community, the district for the most part. And so those are the questions that we've been asking. Those are the processes that we have been looking at to make sure that we kind of can answer those questions. We've been asking questions such as this. When we go out and talk about voter education, we're talking about things such as, let's look at making sure, how do we make sure that the person that you are voting for is going to represent the majority of the district that's voting for them. And those that are not voting for them, obviously, but the ones that are voting for them. And it's not a split part. It would also mean that we would tell people that it would also mean that you would have candidates that would actually have to go to the other part of town to start talking to those constituents there, in order to gain their trust to say, well, you may not be my first candidate, but I don't mind you being my second or third candidate. So our process has been quite interesting, to say the least, to actually train an organization that is, for lack of a better term, that is loaded with older folks, 60s and 70-year-olds that love the idea of, I walk into the polling place and cast one vote. To the point now they're saying, oh, I can cast my vote for however many people that are out there. I have my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. So we like the idea of being that forefront, because it gives us an opportunity to be the folks that are actually helping out with the voter education as far as ranked choice voting is concerned. What we have been doing is sending members from the Richmond Crusade for Voters to speak at other organizations, such as fraternities and sororities, if you will. They now say, oh, I know what that's all about. Well, and I kind of know how that works. Well, at least you are introduced to that process. We're talking about it in not elementary schools, we're talking about it in high schools for the most part. So when people come into our meetings, then we have a ranked choice voting committee report. And so that gives people information also too, as to see that as far as this organization is concerned, we are ahead of this game. So that's what we're finding exciting. And it still has some issues, because people are still trying to figure out, why would you guys even do this? Okay. And we kind of said, we think you might be a little afraid of ranked choice voting because you might be out of a job. So I'm going to leave it at that also. And so therefore, I don't know if I talked 10 minutes or 5, but I'll leave it open for questions so we can have, more conversations or questions asked and answered.
Absolutely. Jerome, that was on point. And I like the fact that you did it with the M&Ms. And I think that people when we have candidates have been trained, because we've trained them, to go towards the people that support them. They're the ones who are going to show up for them. Well, ranked choice voting, to me, not only makes the candidate come to constituents that may not automatically support them as they believe, but it also holds them accountable, because your vote has more power, right? Because you can literally vote them out. I want to thank all of my panelists, but right now we have a great floor opening for questions. Liz, what's the first question on? You're on mute.
All right. There's a lot of good questions in the Q&A already, and we've got some online as well. I think we can pretty easily answer. Lynn Yates asked, how does RCV work in a primarily two-party system? And I know in Virginia, we're mostly talking about primaries, so that's a lot of that answer. But I'm happy to let someone go into more of the weeds on that.
Who would like to take a shot at that?
Well, let me jump in and just note that it can work in any way that we want it to work. So let me give you for example, what we can do is have primaries where you use RCV. You can have general elections. If the law changes, you can have general elections where you use RCV as well. Remember that the Virginia Republicans use RCV in some of their primary elections, particularly their conventions. And the notion, for example, was that Governor Youngkin won his convention primary, essentially RCV, by appealing to more people than some of the folks on the fringe in the Republican Party. He then became a candidate for the general election for governor. Now, if Democrats want to run theirs that way, they could do that. If any of the other parties want to run theirs that way, they could do that. Now, what that could do is create 3 or 4 candidates in the general election. And if we were allowed to have a general election where RCV was also used, then RCV would also be used there. So you can mix it and match it however you want and use it wherever it is appropriate to use it.
All right. Thank you so much, Hank. Did anyone else want to take a stab at it? Jerome, Maria?
I'll take a stab at it real quickly. So we live in a country that has, we have this 2-party duopoly situation. So voters are definitely used to having, most voters show up for general elections, at which point we have 2 candidates, right? One for each party, and that's usually it. Maybe sometimes there's a 3rd party or a write-in candidate. So sometimes it's hard for people to understand how would ranked choice voting be beneficial, but remember that to get those 2 candidates, there's a whole primary process before, as was just mentioned, right? And for nonpartisan elections, some municipalities have nonpartisan elections and so forth. So to me, in terms of what is a strong democracy, it's a democracy that allows multiple candidates to throw their hats in the race, and then the public can decide, right? I really like, as a collective, we really like this candidate better than the others, but have more choice, voters have more choice in who might represent them. So this is something that I love about ranked choice voting, is that it really allows for multiple candidates to run without them being told that they need to drop out, that they're spoiling things for the anointed candidate, right?
Mhm.
You can be a community organizer with very little money and just a very strong vision for your community. You can throw your hat in the race, even if you're pretty sure you might not win. Your voice is still there, your platform's still there, your priorities are still part of the conversation, and you're not spoiling it for anybody. So that's what I wanted to add.
I appreciate that, because that is huge. You have a lot of people who want to be change agents, but they don't have the powers to be and the money behind them. So this actually gives them an opportunity to have a level playing field. Thank you for bringing that up, Maria. Liz, what do we got next? Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Jerome.
that's okay. I think also too, although we talk about a 2-party system, but what's interesting to me is that I think there are going to be other parties, I think, that's going to start using ranked choice voting. And the reason why I say that is because when we were in our infancy as far as supporting ranked choice voting, I had an opportunity to talk to the Forward Party. And so that was just really interesting to have an opportunity to talk to them to say, this is how ranked choice, this is why we started to look at ranked choice voting. I don't know where they are with that, but I'm saying because they've had the conversation about ranked choice voting, then they may be the crew or the group that kind of helps to push this along the next go round and demand that their organization use it on a regular basis. I mean, I don't know, but it was just nice to have that conversation. So I think that you're going to see, I think it's going to, I keep telling people as far as ranked choice voting is concerned, although it's not passed, it didn't pass General Assembly, we didn't use it in the city of Richmond, but I still say that there's smoke that this thing is about to catch on fire. And the reason why I say that there's smoke that this is about to catch on fire, because I belong to other organizations, and the folks that are in these other organizations are much younger than I am. But when they talk about voting for whatever, they're talking about doing through ranked choice voting. If you don't mind, let me just give you an example. The Participatory Budget Committee, they have a group of money that they're going to spend, as far as the city of Richmond is concerned, or communities are concerned. And so they say what happens as far as those projects are concerned, the projects will be put out, project A, project B, project C, district 1, district 2, district 3. But they're saying as far as those projects are concerned, then what they're looking at doing is selecting those projects through ranked choice voting. So the city's going to hear about it. Oh, they did it over here and they did it over here and someone else is looking at doing it. And when, I'm just going to back up a little more, when we talked about one of the things that we heard as far as trying to get ranked choice voting used for city council, one person said, I'm not for this because it's only for city council and not the school board. If it included more elections, then I could support this process.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Jerome. I appreciate your points, and make no mistake, y'all, interrupt me anytime if I miss you. Thanks, Jerome. I appreciate you. Liz, we got another question for the crew?
Sure. I would love to bring up how ranked choice voting affects the viability or electability of candidates of color, how it impacts the influence of voters of color, and is especially in communities that are maybe diverse but not necessarily majority minority. Maria, I feel like that's probably a you question.
Sure.
Well,
and
excuse me, Maria, I want to make sure everybody else has a chance because I skipped y'all last time. I won't do it again. Maria, we're going to start with you, and Jerome, you next, and Hank, you last but not least. Maria.
So this is an excellent question, and it really is a hard question to answer because every community is a little bit different in terms of its demographics, right? In terms of how it's districted, and that districting question has a lot to do with where different demographics live in a community, right? So in a community where let's say the Black population or the Latino population are very segregated, right? And they're all stuck in one district, they're much more likely to be able to elect a candidate of choice in that district, whether they have ranked choice voting or not, right? If the population of color in a community is not segregated and really spread out throughout the community, then how are those districts drawn, right? The thing about districts is somebody's got the pen and somebody's got the power to draw those lines. Are they trying to pack all the people of color into one district and leave all the other districts for Caucasian population to elect those candidates? Are they, there's a lot of power in who holds the pen and who's drawing those lines. So there's a lot of different variables, if you will, that will affect how voters of color, how candidates of color do in all elections, including ranked choice voting elections. Having said that, though, with ranked choice voting, remember, we're getting rid of the split vote, right? We are getting rid of people holding their nose and making that calculation, right? I may really love this candidate, but I know that it's not very likely that they can get elected. So I'm not gonna vote for the candidate that I love. I'm gonna vote for the candidate that I don't hate. So the candidate that's actually gonna be harmful to my community doesn't get elected. Voters should not have to be making calculations like this, right? You should be able to say, I love this candidate. They really align with me and my values. They're going to be great for me and my community. I'm going to give them my first choice vote. And if for whatever reason, this candidate can't get enough popular support to win, this other candidate is just fine too. They're not my favorite, but they're good. They align with my values also. And I'll be happy to help them get elected. So I think for populations, particularly people of color, right? Voters of color, this is an opportunity that we're not used to having, where it's like, just vote your conscience. Who do you love and who do you like and who do you kind of like? And also another thing that I want to mention about ranked choice voting is that voters just rank, as a voter, you should just rank the candidates that you like, right? You should never rank a candidate that you absolutely can't support on your ballot. So each ranking, right, your favorite choice, then your second choice, your third choice, as long as it's candidates that you can get behind, gives space so that the candidate that's going to be harmful for your community does not get elected. So in a way, you're voting for your choices, right? For who you think is best. And you're also making a statement voting against those people who are going to be harmful for your community. So all of this gives voters of color, communities of color, an opportunity to really have a voice, have a say in who gets elected. And importantly, sort of the other side of the coin, have a voice, have a say in who does not get elected, which is equally important. I don't know if
Absolutely.
any of my colleagues want to add to that.
Jerome, Hank, Jerome, you want to jump in?
I think when we talk about communities of color, I think that there are two things that we want to look at. One, when we start talking about going out registering voters for the most part, we're looking at those folks that are not voting, period, okay? And then we're looking at the folks that are engaged in voting, all right? And so when we look at the folks that are engaged in voting, I think what's happening here is that the folks that are engaged in voting, they're coming along to this ranked choice voting process. And I think the reason why I say they're coming along, we have the progressives, and I'm gonna call those the younger folks, the progressives, you know? And then we have the traditional voters, if you will, in the African-American community. And the traditional voters like the idea of, this is the way I've always done it. You know, we're the ones that are saying, well, why don't they teach cursive writing in schools any longer? Well, the kids say, well, I don't need that. Okay. You know, and so it's the same thing as far as ranked choice voting is concerned. I think the progressive young folks, the metro area young Democrats, if you will, the folks, the minority kids that are in that group, you know, the Virginia young Dems and all of the young this, that, and the others, I think they kind of get the ranked choice voting. And so they're going to be the ones that's going to change this process of, you know, this is a minority thing. It's not going to be a minority thing much longer, I don't think. I think it's going to be a thing about education and engagement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jerome. Hank.
Yeah, let me just note, there still will be some holding one's nose, right? I mean, I hear what Maria is saying, but at some point there may well be some people who you just go, I can live with them. I'm not thrilled with them, but boy, am I afraid of that other clown.
Yeah.
So in some ways there may be some of that. However, everybody will have to show up in places where they have not shown up before. One of the things about ranked choice voting, even if you don't get the candidate you want to win, if the candidate who is elected is more responsive to you regardless, that's of value. What it's going to take is a couple of cycles of this until we really get a sense of what's going on. And my guess is that what's going to happen is eventually you're going to find people who are really on the fringes, probably not running. And instead, what you're going to end up with are 4 or 5 people in any particular race who are all right? They're kind of acceptable. And then people will be choosing among those folks. But it's going to be an interesting process, but I agree with everyone that it's going to be helpful. Now, again, we do have to figure out, do we want to have a primary before a general? I think that's a huge question that we have to think about, and we'll see what happens as various pieces of legislation go through.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I also want to add to your point, Hank, that yes, we're still going to hold our nose. And there was a question, I'm going to answer half of that question. But not only do we have to give more information to our communities, not only do we have to give information, the information givers have to be trusted by our communities. The candidates have to go to our communities. They have to, because if they don't, they definitely may not win their seat in ranked choice voting. Because if I don't know you, I don't know who you are, I'm not going to think about picking your name. So I think it would be what, as someone who's an elections geek, I want in a perfect world, work for my vote. You are a public servant, you serve me. And in order for them to know that, they have to know there are punitive measures that can be taken against them if they don't do what they stated they would do. Right now, they have no accountability. I think ranked choice voting can change that. Liz, I had to get off my soapbox. I had to get in.
Yeah. So a couple more things I'd love to get to before we run out of time, because I think they're really, really important, and they're duplicate questions in the chat, so other people think they're important too.
Absolutely.
One of them is we make sure that low information voters
Mhm.
are not relatively disenfranchised. How do we, do we expect them to now be experts on even more candidates than they were supposed to be familiar with before in a first past the post setting? Now, if they've got to rank, isn't that an increased onus on them?
Great question. Can I start with Jerome first? Jerome?
I think the low information voters, I think they'll have enough information to make that decision as far as ranked choice voting is concerned. I don't think that they're going to go out here and say, oh, I need to know what bills this person passed, if this is the incumbent, or how strong this person's platform is. And then also, too, when we look at some elections, if you will, or some of the candidates for the most part, a lot of the candidates can look pretty generic. Okay. And so what happens is we sort of take the idea and say, I like this person saying this, but there's a little tweak in person number 2, and then there's a little tweak in person number 3. I think the low information, the voter that has the low information voter will actually participate in this process because they have enough information to go in there and make the decisions and say, this is the person that I would absolutely love to see in office. This is the person that I can live with, and this is the person that I can tolerate. All right. The other one, the 4th and the 5th one, I'm not going to vote for them. So I think that they'll have that they will gather that information, because I'll tell you what I think will happen is that they will go with, and I'm not trying to belittle their process of gathering information, but they will go with the necessary soundbite, the social media campaign for the most part to say, I like this person. They will have the information. They will gather the information that they need in order to make ranked choice voting work for them.
Great points there, Jerome. Maria, you want to jump in, and then I'm gonna go to Hank.
Sure. So I'd like to flip this narrative, right? The onus is not on the voter, actually. The onus is on the candidates. The candidates, every single vote is on the table. If we look back at what we were talking about before, the way that things have happened before, it's this plurality voting, right? What happens with plurality voting? If I'm a candidate, I know who my base is, right? I know who my volunteers are, who's giving me money, who's going to vote for me. I count on them already. I kind of take them for granted. I don't need to hit those doors very much. They're already in my bucket. I know who's voting for somebody else. I'm not going to those doors because they are not in my bucket. I can't get those votes. It's a waste of my time. I'm going to go knock on the doors of those undecided voters that are maybe like 10, maybe 20% of the voters are not clear on who their favorite candidate is in plurality voting. Now, as a candidate, then my job is to talk to 15, 20% of the population, and that's it, right? With ranked choice voting, as a candidate, every single vote is on the table. So you have your base, that's awesome. That's your first choice voters. Your second choice voters are going to be those folks who prefer somebody else as their first candidate, but who might, your values might align enough with that candidate that you could ask for that voter's second choice vote. You may be able to ask for somebody's maybe third choice vote if they prefer other 2 people. But the strategy for a candidate in ranked choice voting is to know that every single vote's on the table and that you're going to need those second choice votes and even those third choice votes to win. So you're going to be knocking on a lot of doors, even for folks who prefer somebody else. So that's the way that voter education happens to a large degree with ranked choice voting. The onus is on the candidates. If you want to win, you're going to have to talk to a lot of voters, not just the voters who already like you.
Absolutely. That kind of takes away from the fact that some candidates, like you stated, they already know who's in their bucket. So they don't have to work hard for the other folks who they believe aren't going to vote, aren't coming out, and they ain't got to worry about them. Hey, thank you, Maria.
Maria and Jerome have hit it. So I'm going to say, I agree with y'all, and we'll just get another question.
I know that's right, Hank. Look, know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Liz, what we got?
Last thing, because we've had several questions, and Maria has put some great resources in the Q&A about multi-winner ranked choice voting elections. And I'm going to put one in the chat from the last webinar we did that goes into the mechanics of how those work when you're electing multiple candidates at once. But I would love to touch on how representation is affected for communities of color and, you know, for a diverse governing body in general, with a multi-winner ranked choice voting election, such as the one that's happening in Arlington, where they're going to elect 2 members of their county board. Their primary will be with RCV, or somewhere like Alexandria that has 6 city council members that all get elected at one time.
All right.
Yeah, let me just note, it can get, or it can feel a little complicated, but it's not that hard as long as you are limiting the number of votes that people can cast. So if you're in a jurisdiction that let's say that has 3 people who are running for 3 positions are being elected. If every voter has 1 vote, then all it takes is 25% of the electorate to elect a candidate of choice. So not surprisingly, if you're talking about a jurisdiction where a minority group is not a majority, right, and wouldn't normally be able to elect somebody, you actually might want a multi-member district, and it might actually work in the favor of minority groups to have multi-member districts. And when you add ranked choice voting to that, as long as the group is voting for sort of the same general candidates, you can ensure that you will have a representative more likely than in a single member plurality voting system. I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll go nuts into the specifics, and I don't want to do that.
All right. Maria, you want to take a stab at it, and then you, Jerome?
I'll be happy to. Yeah, this is something that's not the easiest thing to talk about because it involves math and percentages and things like this. But basically, the concept is with proportional representation, right, which you can achieve by using a ranked ballot, that if you have a constituency that is, 30%, 33% of the population, you should get 1/3 of the seats on your governing body, right? So whether that's by race or by sort of like issue area that people care about, if you have 50% of the population, you should be able to elect half of the representatives. If you have 1/3 of the population, you should be able to elect 1/3 of the governing body representatives, and so forth. So when we're talking about ranked choice voting with a single winner, that threshold to win that majority is 50% plus 1 of the vote, right? If you have a jurisdiction where like 51% of the voters are white, they're likely that person that gets elected with 51% of the vote, 50% of the vote plus 1 will be the candidate that is preferred by that majority of the population. In this case, hypothetical would be the white population. With ranked choice voting, that threshold to win, like Henry was talking about, gets lower. So if you're electing 2 people, instead of the winner, instead of needing 50% plus 1 of the vote, needs 33% plus 1 of the vote. If you're electing 3 people, it's 25% of the vote plus 1. So let's say that you're in the case that we were just talking about now, there's 2 people getting elected, right, for one district or whatever. Then using ranked choice voting for multiple winners, in this case 2, would ensure that 66% of the population is able to elect a candidate of choice, as opposed to 50%, right? So that means you get the majority population, and then also fair representation for other folks who are not part of that majority group. So proportional representation really is the gold standard in terms of making sure that minority groups within a community, as long as there's enough numbers, or if there's coalitions built in, right, with different minority populations, that you also can elect a candidate of choice. And I'm so thrilled to hear that that's how some of these elections are going to happen.
Thank you so much, Maria. Jerome?
I have nothing to add to that. I think they both covered it extremely well.
I appreciate that, sir. We've got a couple of minutes, Liz, because we're moving into 7:30, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. Liz, do we have one more burning question?
We have several is the problem. I'm trying to pare them down. I
Let me
think maybe the simple, go
Can
ahead.
y'all give us 15 more minutes? Yes? Okay. All right. Pick two. We're gonna have to do this again, Liz.
After we do this a lot of times. Does ranked choice voting protect incumbents or have any effect at all?
Okay. Who wants to take a stab at that?
I will, and I'm going to say no, it does not. It does
All
not
right.
protect the incumbents in any way, shape, form, or fashion. If the incumbent is someone that has been pretty lousy as far as their community is concerned, but they have had an opportunity to actually stay with their base and keep getting elected and still being lousy, then ranked choice voting is going to prevent that. Because now what that means is that we've talked about this over and over, that incumbent will have to go to where they did not spend a lot of dollars or time or energy into certain parts of the community to make sure they're now talking to. So that means that not only will that incumbent have to step up their campaign game, but then once they're going to have, if they're elected again, okay, then they're going to have to step up their community engagement game as well. So I don't think it's going to protect the incumbents at all. Matter of fact, I think that when we were talking about ranked choice voting at the Richmond Crusade for Voters, some of the incumbents felt threatened. They're like, "Oh, this is not going to." And they said, "Somebody in your organization is planning to run for my position, which is why you're promoting ranked choice voting." And we're like, "No, that's not the case at all. You know, no one's interested in the position. What we're interested in is more so in a fair representation of all the districts." And so I don't think it's going to protect the incumbent in any way, shape, form, or fashion. That's why I truly believe that a lot of the incumbents in Richmond were afraid of ranked choice voting, which is why they said no to it.
You know what? You and I are on the same page, my friend. I'm gonna go to Hank, Maria, then I'm gonna come to you. Hank?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, I think Jerome's right that if you have an incumbent who's very good at what they're doing, then, well, sure, ranked choice voting will be helpful because they will be the preferred choice of their constituents. If they're not doing what they're doing or what they should do, then there could be issues. Now, another piece of the puzzle is that people may be more likely to monitor their representatives because they know that their vote will count in the upcoming election, which can be helpful as well. Now, the only limitation that I might will have on that is if we don't have a primary, then you might have a situation where a general is so full of candidates that name recognition will be helpful. But that's something that we can find a way to deal with in a different setting. So I generally think it's true that the great candidates or the great representatives, yeah, they'll always have an advantage because they're good. The ones who aren't that good may have some problems.
Maria. Thank you, Hank.
Well, I have to disagree with my colleagues a little bit, just in that there's some data, right? Some statistics that show that name recognition is the number one thing that that helps a candidate, right? So if you're an incumbent, you've got that name recognition baked in already. So just being an elected official is going to help you get elected because your name's out there, people have heard about you, and that's all fair and good. With a ranked choice voting election, though, we have this different sort of data point, which is the best way to get a vote in ranked choice voting elections is to ask for it, right? So you need to go to people, talk to them, and say, can I count on your vote? Will you rank me number one on your ballot? And if they say, I prefer somebody else, you can say, will you rank me number two on your ballot, right? You're not going to get those second choice votes, third choice votes if you don't ask for them. So that's the strategy piece that is unique to ranked choice voting that is going to get you those votes. You do have an advantage as an incumbent, but if you're an incumbent that's lazy and not doing the work, not going to knock on doors, not going to ask for those second choice votes and those third choice votes, you're not likely to get reelected.
Thank you so much, Maria. Look, productive discourse is where we're at here. We've got to put the pros, the cons, so we can see it all. But I think one thing we can agree upon is candidates will have to work. Liz, one more question.
All right. Does ranked choice voting lead to a bigger, broader, more diverse field of candidates?
Great question. Maria, I'm gonna
Yes.
go to you first, ma'am.
I mean, absolutely. And we see this jurisdiction after jurisdiction. I'm going to give you a couple of examples just off the top of my head. So the city of Minneapolis implemented ranked choice voting many election cycles ago. When they implemented ranked choice voting, they had one of the least diverse governing bodies in the nation, even though the city itself is one of the most diverse. Right now, that city council is as diverse as the city of Minneapolis is, one of the most diverse governing bodies in the country. And that's just happened over a few cycles of ranked choice voting. In the city of Las Cruces here in my state of New Mexico, we had a governing body that was in a city that's majority Latino and pretty young demographically. We had a governing body that was majority male, majority white, and majority, like past retirement age. After 2 cycles of ranked choice voting, city of Las Cruces has a city council member that is all female, all Latina, and like the median age has dropped by like 20 years. That would have not happened without ranked choice voting. And then lastly, city of New York implemented ranked choice voting the last cycle for their municipal primaries. And the city of New York had a notoriously unrepresentative governing body with very few city councilors of color, very few female councilors to the number of councilors that are serving on that body. And right now there's a majority people of color council. There's, I believe, also a majority women council. And again, the median age has dropped dramatically. So, I mean, that the evidence about this can't be denied.
Thank you so much, Maria. Jerome.
Well, I can only speak for Richmond for the most part. And the reason why, what's interesting to me as far as Richmond is concerned, as far as our candidacy is concerned, it has always been for the last, I want to say for the last, since 2016, when I really started paying attention, has been extremely diverse. I mean, everyone decides that they want to hold office. Now, because we don't have ranked choice voting, we pretty much get the same thing as far as all elections are concerned. The incumbent for the most part, or the person with the most money for the most part, is going to be elected. But as far as the candidates are concerned, we have such a diversity, and I'm sure that we're going to continue to have that diversity, whether we have ranked choice voting or not. I think what ranked choice voting will do for us is actually allow that diversity to now hold offices.
Hey.
Agreed. Absolutely agree.
All righty then. Well, listen, I said 2 more questions, and 2 more questions it is. I want to thank each and every one of my panelists, Maria, Jerome, and my man, Hank. I know you laughing. And of course, my executive director, Liz. This is going to be one of many. We are determined to inform, engage, and empower our community to make the right choice for them. But we're going to give you the information. So, and we are hopeful that you choose ranked choice voting. So with that being said, I want to give each and every one of y'all 60 seconds. I'm gonna start with my man, Hank, 60 seconds. Anything you want to say to our lovely audience?
Hey, thank you everybody for coming out. Ranked choice voting is an important issue, not just for who you elect, but like we say, for campaigns, for who runs, and for the concept of responsive government. Even if you have the same candidates who happen to win, the notion that folks have suggested is absolutely right. They've got to compete for votes, which means that they have to compete for what it is that you care about from a democratic perspective. That's a huge issue, and one that we have let go by the wayside for the last several decades, to be quite honest. So I'll stop there and just say thank you again for folks for showing up, and hopefully I'll see you at some point in the future.
Thank you, Hank. Jerome, 60 seconds, sir.
Great. I want to thank you also for participating. I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of the panel. But, you know, this is an election year in Virginia. And so we're also looking at an election in 2024. And so the big question that I'm asking the Richmond Crusade for Voters and everyone else to ask this question to their candidates: would you carry a bill to support ranked choice voting? If yes, why? If no, why? Why
Absolutely.
not?
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Jerome. Maria, my friend.
Thank you so much. I also have enjoyed this conversation quite a bit. The point that I want to leave you all with is that our democracy is in trouble, and we all need to put in our little bit of effort that we can individually to make sure that we reimagine a stronger democracy where we actually all can participate and all of our votes actually matter. In your city, if you've already passed ranked choice voting, you're going to implement, you can educate your family members, you can educate your neighbors, you can have a mock election at your neighborhood pizza joint. It really goes down to that neighborhood level organizing and education to get people excited about it, to get people to think, wait, maybe I do want to vote in this election because this feels different. I'm excited about it. That's your job, to get people in your immediate community to get fired up about it. And if your community doesn't have ranked choice voting yet, you can still talk to people about it. Like Jerome's talking about, you can ask candidates about it. You can ask people about it. The more that people hear, it's kind of a whisper campaign, right? You don't want people to be completely unaware of something by the time it gets passed in the community. You want to plant those seeds and get people excited about the potential, right? The vision for a reimagined, transformed democracy. So we all have a job to do. Let's get it done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maria. Liz.
I want to echo everybody else. Thank you all so much for spending time with us. Thank you to your panelists for your time and expertise. I think everyone in the reform space would agree that a challenge we all face is taking these academic, math-riddled reform ideas, and the real challenge is to put some blood in them and to put some real stakes behind them. And you all lending your time and your perspective and your brilliance to this conversation, I think really helps make it exciting and make it hopeful and present it, I think, as one of the many changes that needs to happen for our democracy, which, as Maria said, is in trouble. So thank you all so much. I'm just thrilled to have had you, and thank you to those of you at home who gave us your Monday night. And Vickie, thank you for making this fun always.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank our audience. You came out here on a Monday evening, and this is your opportunity to serve as that change agent. One person can absolutely make a difference. Talk about ranked choice voting. Jerome left us with a card. All the seats are up in November, every single one, the Senate and the House. When you're talking to your candidate, when you're speaking to your candidate, ask them about ranked choice voting. If you're scared, say you're scared. And lastly, you know, this is about performance management, y'all. For them to keep their jobs, they got to work for everybody, and everybody is us. So thank you so much. Happy Monday. Have a great evening. I will see you next time. We're going to be doing something probably in about 6 to 8 weeks. I already put that out there for Liz. And we want y'all back. So we got to work around y'all's schedule.
Thank you all so much. Everybody have a great night.
Bye-bye. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye.
I appreciate y'all too.